Welcome to this episode of Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. I'm Julie Cooper, a mystery and thriller writer, and half of the duo bringing you this regular podcast series. I have a feeling we're in for a lively program today with our multi-talented guest. But first, a quick thanks to my brother Chris Squires for his composition and performance of The Man in the Panama Hat. Now, I've had the benefit of hearing all the lyrics for this song, and The Man in the Panama Hat definitely fits the mold as a noir character, something we'll learn more about very, very soon. Right, Wendy?
That's right. And let me tell you, here's an amazing description of a person that just sends chills up my spine. Known for personal bravery. Julie, we've chatted before about the importance of believable, interesting characters to a successful mystery story. And for the protagonist, there's appeal beyond that for readers as they seek something admirable. I'm going to add another striking dimension to the theme of groundbreaking characters, personal bravery. Today, we're going to walk on the noir side and more with our guest, an exhilarating and genre-bending author, Danny Gardner. From his beginnings as a young stand-up comedian in Def Comedy Jam All-Stars Volume 12, Danny Gardner has already enjoyed careers as an actor, director, and screenwriter. He's a recent Pushcart Prize nominee for his creative nonfiction piece, Forever. His first short fiction piece, Labor Day, appeared in Beat to a Pulp, and his flash fiction has been featured in Out of the Gutter and on Noir on the Air. He's a frequent reader at Noir at the Bar events nationwide. He blogs regularly at 7 Criminal Minds. He's a proud member of the Mystery Writers of America and the International Thriller Writers. And now available is his first novel, which I highly recommend, A Negro and an Ophé, The Tales of Elliot Caprice. Welcome, Danny Gardner.
Thanks for having me, you all.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. Danny, I enjoyed your incredible book so much. It was after I finished it that I read in the acknowledgments that your book fictionalizes a real person, Lieutenant William Drury. Wow, that got me Googling the archives of the Chicago Tribune, 1950. One of the things noted in the Tribune article about William Drury is that he was known for personal bravery. Would you share with us your thoughts about this person and why he anchors the plot of your book?
Yeah, well, I'm from Chicago, born and raised, and I've always been hip on true crime history as it relates to Chicago. I mean, Chicago is known for, perhaps the Obamas now, but for a long time, despite the richness of its broader history, somehow organized crime, Chicago political corruption, police corruption. These things seem to follow around the notion of what Chicago is and isn't to most folks. So, you grow up, and even in civics class in Chicago public school, before you learn anything about the country, you learn about Al Capone, you learn about Sam Giancana, you learn about where the street gang boom in the 60s and 70s came from. So crime is as much of a part of Chicago's heritage as just about anything else. And so it's something that I was always naturally interested in.
Yeah.
There was a crusading pulp journalist named Bill Drury. Turns out he was a police captain. Well, he was an acting captain. He was fired from the Chicago Police Department for uncovering a little too much on them during his moonlighting. So he just decided to become a crusading journalist. He also was kind of a dandy who enjoyed the spotlight, enjoyed press himself, enjoyed getting his picture taken, and enjoyed showing up to nefarious murders and standing there as if Bill Drury had the scoop. So he was just a little too high profile for him to be so involved in eventually the uncovering of collusion between the Chicago Police Department, Chicago city government, and the Chicago outfit, which, because we don't have the mafia, La Casa Nostra. That's kind of a New Yorkie kind of thing. Chicago had its own thing, and so we're talking about Tony Accardo being the big boss, and Sam Giancana, in his youthful beginnings, was the guy who was tasked with kind of taking over the South Side from the black middle class. And
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of intertwining in history. I mean, there's so many mob stories. I had a friend of mine, I used to play in his house. It was like one of the homes Al Capone owned on the South Side. And it had four floors and a basement with trap doors and a vault. And it was common. It was just regular. Whereas most people would like to know where their favorite athlete or their favorite movie star, their favorite author lives. I mean, that was like, oh yeah, he lives in Al Capone's own house. Like,
oh my gosh.
That was just like a normal thing for most folks. And so I was always into that. And I wanted to insert the possibility that my protagonist, Elliot Caprice, as a cop, as so many cops that I knew and that I know and have been, was raised by growing up, would actually exist in proximity to the Kefauver, Committee on Organized Crime during the 40s and the 50s in Washington, and that perhaps his paths would involve intersecting with somebody like a crusading, pulp journalist who loves, the spotlight, like Bill Drury. And, Bill Drury, unfortunately, was assassinated in the garage of his home, back in the 50s.
Yeah.
And they never found out who did it. So, it's not like a Forrest Gump thing where I'm, having to shake hands with Kennedy and everybody can see it. It's just that, well, who's to say Elliot Caprice wasn't in the garage when he got shot in the garage? Who's to say that didn't have an effect on him? So I put Elliot Caprice on the fringes. I like having him as a fringe character, I'll say.
Yeah.
I like having Elliot Caprice on the fringe of the organized crime, anti-crime movement in the United States. I like having him on the fringes of desegregation of the United States Army, the United States Armed Forces, as a result of service in World War II. I like having him on the fringes of the civil rights movement. There's nothing saying that there were all sorts of people that we don't know about, that haven't been written about in the history books, that don't get articles written about them or don't have holidays named for them, who were there. And so I just thought it would be interesting if I tried to interweave Chicago true crime history in this fictional narrative. One, because I don't have to make it up. I just, world building isn't that necessary. I know the world already. And the heavy metals in my bloodstream from drinking Chicago water is still there. So I'm with it. But at the same time, I believe that if you can make it real enough for the reader that things actually really happened, they'll believe the other stuff that you're giving them that is fictionalized. And so, because it was a bit of a stretch for me to, hang, to center hard-boiled noir, hard-boiled history in Black life. So I wanted to give some folks some familiarity about how the whole world wasn't a Black world. It was simply a Black life in an overall world made up of a whole lot of different people. And so I think Bill Drury was, at first he was a device, but in the end I just started feeling really bad because this is a real human being and his heirs are out there somewhere. Maybe they come across this book one day, maybe they Google their dad's name and maybe they find a link to this discussion that we're having and they listen to it. And I wouldn't want somebody using one of my heirs, one of my relatives in a novel and playing his murder up. So I just wanted to show it as I find him to be complicated. He was certainly opportunistic. He was very self-serving, and yet he did a whole lot of good with cracking wide open the links between organized crime and a go along to get along government in the third largest city in America. So, he deserves that. He deserves to be treated lovingly and respectfully. And he's also effective in showing folks that, crime fiction loves their anti-heroes. I don't think the Black community has enough heroes for us to be giving them anti-heroes. But, a lot of times, if it's not a gray hat, it can be a soiled white hat. And, I don't mind that so much. So,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, a white hat's going to get dirty every once in a while, even just with your own fingerprints taking it on and off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was where I was coming from. And I thought that real life William Drury and fictional, or just real to me, Elliot Caprice, would make for some nice bedfellows in the beginning.
I think it's an excellent cross-section or cross-intersection of the two. And really the character comes across to me as just, such almost a representative of like every man. You know what I mean? Like anybody has this within them, I think that was actually a really encouraging message for me when I was reading it. The urban noir books describe like the underbelly of life in a city, like Chicago in your book. You live in Los Angeles now, but coming from Chicago, and in fact, you dedicate your book to Chicago, my love. May your south and west sides rise again. Can you tell us a little more? I mean, we sense from your last answer the feelings that you have for the city, but tell us a little more about your personal feelings to the city.
Well, what can I say? A prophet gets no love in their hometown. I think I read that in the New Testament once, right? And so, Chicago, the blues fits, right? Like, the blues left the Mississippi Delta probably around the turn of the 19th century, from the 19th century into the 20th century. And the reason why the Delta blues took root and grew worldwide, all across the globe, from Chicago, is because the blues fits in that city, man. Like, it's just a place where despair is always present, and yet it's about to be 40 below zero outside. So despite your despair, you might want to get your rear end up and get busy in life, because the winter's coming and it's unforgiving. And I always, but in contrast, Los Angeles is a place that, while I love it and I'll never leave, and it ain't just because of the weather. I mean, we could use a good 40 below zero a couple of days a year, just for folks, just for folks to snap out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, the cold doesn't discriminate. The cold doesn't care. When we have an Arctic blast coming in, and it ain't even as cold in Alaska as it is in Chicago sometimes. And so, it's equal opportunity cold. It's equal opportunity shake up of your system. And, it's the city that works. It's been the capital of Black America since, not just its founding by a Haitian and some Native Americans who put together a trading post, and from there it grew in the 1800s. It's just, Chicago is a place that its richness in all life means it could be rich in Black life, because at some point, Black folks can be left alone to start their own communities, and in order to develop their own inner economies, in order to have their own sense of culture, and develop their own cultural values that work within America's values. Because, well, the Lithuanian community has the same thing, and the Polish community has the same thing, and the Filipino community has the same thing. And, Chinatown isn't just a novelty place where you go buy souvenirs and get Chinese food. I mean, Chinatown is the seat of commerce in the Midwest for Asian Americans. And
That's a great point.
It's a powerful base. So just by virtue of the fact that although everybody comes together in the center of the city to work, everyone goes home to their own neighborhoods to live among their own people and do their own thing. Black folks were able to do the same thing. Now, not without difficulty, and not without oppression, and not without redlining and discrimination on a lot of different levels, and yet we're still prominent in Chicago. I mean, to the point where even to this day, the largest black population in the United States is Cook County. Within, the Chicago is the county seat in Cook County. And that's to the tune of millions upon millions.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. Yeah.
Yeah. So, folks during the Great Migration, from the South in the 20s, where, it gives you an idea that the history books call it a migration when it's American citizens just moving north from the South.
Interesting, isn't that? Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact that it was just so many of them en masse, I guess you could call it there's perhaps a migratory pattern. I mean, it pretty much travels up Route 66 and on the Rock Island Railway. So, but still, it's just, your first stop was Chicago, and you fanned out from there to places like, Gary, Indiana, and Detroit, Michigan, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, that was the arterial flow of black folks from the South during Jim Crow. You had the Great Mississippi Flood, and there was a gigantic boll weevil infestation that wiped out sharecropping. And then, the Ku Klux Klan had a little something to do with driving people out too. And so folks found refuge in Chicago. And man, the food, the music, the culture, the religions, the attitudes, the sense of identity, it's still there. I mean, it has its problems, don't get me wrong. And, sometimes to certain folks' political advantage, they make a whole lot about the problems. But Chicago has always solved the problems given enough time and without much interference from anywhere else. And so when I make a point about may her South and West Sides rise again, it isn't just that, the predominance of the African American population in Chicago is on the South and West Sides of Chicago. It's simply that the richness of life, because everybody knows where the Cubs play, and everybody knows where downtown Chicago is, and everybody knows where the lakefront is, and everybody knows where Soldier Field and United Center and the places their favorite Chicago sports teams play. And some folks think that Chicago stops south of Madison Avenue, but it doesn't. But on the South and West Sides is where you buy a house and the last person who owned it is a Lithuanian Jewish couple who sold it to you because they knew you and they rented to you. So they just sold it to you and moved to Skokie. Or, your 1/3. The first time I ever met a black person was half Polish. I met them on the South Side of Chicago. It's these kind of interconnections that are possible in that place.
That's beautiful.
And if it rises for black folks, it rises for everybody.
Yeah.
There isn't anything about making certain that life gets better for African Americans that doesn't raise the bar for all Americans.
Yeah.
So, just on balance, that's what I'm always thinking about. But I don't think of myself as being a citizen of Black America. I'm an American. I just so happen to be black, which, is pretty much to me, like winning the lottery. It's just a blessing. So that's where I'm coming from when I dedicate the book like that.
That's beautiful. Yeah, your affection really shines through there. Let me talk a little bit about just noir fiction. Noir fiction includes stories that are close to hard-boiled, where the protagonist is not a detective, but is usually a victim, a suspect, or a perpetrator. Hard-boiled fiction is where the protagonist confronts violence on a regular basis, and the term refers to the resulting tough and cynical attitude from burnout that's triggered by violence. And mob stories fit well in this. Noir protagonists have self-destructive qualities and deal with legal, political, or some other system that's corrupt and victimizes. So somehow you've included all of this in A Negro and an Ofay. and added even more substance by including racism in your story. An external and internal struggle for your protagonist. Reading this novel that was set in 1950s Chicago and surroundings, it felt like you really upped the ante. Like, what if on top of all that this protagonist, Elliot Caprice, is facing, racism too? Can you talk about adding this dimension to noir?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of noir, even when I was a kid. Hard-boiled crime fiction for me. These private investigators who seem to have an immutable core, an immutable moral center, although they're kind of gray hats, smudged white hats. The classic period of hard-boiled noir is the 50s. Is post-World War II. This time of prosperity creates a wider dispersion of wealth, and therefore there's always somebody willing to help you redistribute your wealth to them. We get great classic stories about confidence men and women and, folks who commit crimes out of desperation, or you got the other side, which is, you can't turn to the police because perhaps your life is a little shady yourself. So
Yeah.
you go to a Sam Spade, you go to a Philip Marlowe, who won't ask too many questions, and if you put cash on the barrelhead, they'll follow a trail for you, and you don't have to give them all the details. You just got to give them enough to get started, and they'll suss it out. And I love those classic tropes, and I love the classic hard-boiled structure, and it's really indicative of the post-World War II American period. It's just that, I can't help the fact that the classic hard-boiled period pretty much coincides with an era of the most transparent racial hostility toward Black folks in the 20th century. Like, it goes hand in hand. If you want to write hard-boiled noir, you're going to write it as it takes place during the 50s, unless you're going to do something cool like, adapt, Chandler and rewrite it for the 80s or the 90s or something, and we see a lot of that in the movie business. So if you're going to write classic hard-boiled noir, you're going to write it in the 50s. And if you're going to center your story in a Black American experience, then racism's just coming along with that, man. It's just, it's there. It's always there. It's not as if I don't think I could have taken it out. I know we think I put it in, but in fact, I would have had to do more work to take it out. Just, part of the charm for me growing up, being raised by folks who were, born in that classic period, and having grandparents who, had to come of age and raise families in that classic period, was that there was a sense of pride to be able to survive living in an incredibly racially polarized city like Chicago. It was just, there was a sense of grit. There was a sense of toughness. There was a sense of, I bought this house even though, the white folks in this neighborhood didn't want me living here and tried to make it hard for me. I bought it anyway, and I was able to stay.
Yeah.
You hear stories like that. Like this high school that you're in now every day used to be all white high school until the 60s. And then this happened, and then that happened. And, there was a certain sense of pride being able to survive racially hostile neighborhoods when you're Black. Just, you take the marches on poverty that Martin Luther King toward the end of his career prior to his death, when he was taken on across the United States and, in Memphis and in Detroit and in Chicago. And, he left Chicago and said, I would rather march through Selma, Alabama again than try to march through the south side of Chicago. And
wow.
And there's a sense of like, well, yeah, that's Chicago, man. That's just kind of, they breed them different here. We're tougher here. I know a lot of people think that Chicago is back east. A lot of people think that Chicago is some, some annex of New York City, but they couldn't be more different than each other. And, it's just that part of its charm is the fact that virulent Northern racism, virulent Midwestern racism couldn't destroy it.
Yeah.
At some point, folks, you cross a certain parallel, you cross certain intersections, you cross into a certain side of town, and there's an immediate truce. And you have to imagine from its beginnings, when DuSable founded the place as a trading outpost, and that's how it grew, it was the only place to trade in the Midwest over the span of, maybe, hundreds, if not 1,000 miles. So you had to look at a lot of people you normally didn't feel comfortable around in order to do business, in order to make a dollar. If it's beaver pelts or if it's bootleg liquor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Interesting.
You got to deal with somebody that doesn't normally look like you. And
exactly.
And if you take 1952 in the summer, we're dealing with, the Korean conflict. At the same time, folks are coming home post-war. And, even though it was a time of prosperity and we had this boon, it wasn't a boon for everybody. And so, where are these textures coming in? And then on top of it, it's just, you get a black guy who's trying to find his man or his men or his woman, and he's knocking on doors and chasing down leads and, interrogating people and questioning people and digging up clues. Well, I mean, a black person can't freely walk around doing that in the 50s. So
so it's like integral to the history itself.
Yeah, I'd be faking it. If you read a book about a, black, half black, mulatto, African American protagonist in 1952 in Chicago, and he didn't experience racism, you'd read half of that book and then throw it at me before you finish. Because, man, come on. Please, give me a break. But I also hope I showed that it didn't slow him down, it didn't deter him. It helped him be sharp.
Yes.
And he took it as a matter of fact. I mean, perhaps Elliot Caprice isn't the type of cat that would have a voter's registration card at all. Or if he did, if he was walking around today, he might vote libertarian. I don't know. I don't know what he would do.
Yeah.
But just, he's got a job. He has a dogged resolve. He has a bad attitude in a lot of ways. So, he just doesn't know when to quit. And he just doesn't know when something's not his business. He could care less. And so I think that whereas perhaps there's a bit of uncommon valor in Elliot, I've seen that valor evidenced in a whole lot of people, at least the people who I grew up around, at least people who raised me, at least the parents of the kids in the neighborhood on the South Side that I grew up in. It was just one of those things. I'm not going to say that the world is better off for it having, virulent racism for some of its citizens.
No.
I will say that I think I'm better off for having experienced it. And I think I'm better off as a human being, and certainly better off as a writer, for being able to navigate it while remaining true to myself. Yeah, it was a challenge. And yeah, it was dangerous. Yeah, and I still got to deal with certain things today. But I really think it put the color in my cheeks and the pep in my step. And, while I don't know how I would have done things any differently, so I wrote the novel as if Elliot didn't know how he would have done things any differently, if any of that makes sense. I mean, I don't know, because I could go on forever about it. I don't mean
does.
I think
but just, yeah.
I think it does make sense, and I think that Elliot is he embodies it so beautifully, and it's the perfect factor to add into the noir genre. I thought it was the perfect dimension. Speaking about your characters, how has acting enhanced the way that you write your characters?
Well, that's easy. When you're an actor, the character is all you get. And, while if you're in the theater, it's really cool because, other folks have a stake in the crafting of your performance. Other people have a stake in the choices that you make when you're crafting an acting performance, right? Like you get your background, you go to a lot of rehearsals, you know, you have to work with a particular text that, you know, depending on who wrote it, somebody got to kind of Pulitzer for it. And if you go left with your performance, you're gonna irk the ire of theater goers. I mean, but you know, when you get to do a guest star on a TV show, man, like, you know, if you've got your 15 lines in a CSI episode, or you get 3 episodes in, you know, Grey's Anatomy or something, nobody's really checking your performance. Nobody cares. You got to go in, you got to hit your lines, you got to make your marks, you got to do what you got to do, because it's a workmanlike approach, because they kick these things out every week. So where you put the work into crafting your own character, where you put in the work in crafting your own performance, is the internal life that you bring to it, because nobody's got time to direct you as if it's all about helping you win an Emmy. It's really just about going to work every day. So what acting has done for me, I prize character. I really do. Yeah. I would rather move the story along with dialogue rather than heavy prose. I would rather not leave things up to chance. I would rather develop certain details so that even if you don't know where something came from, you're aware of the detail and go, I wonder where that came from. And it keeps you interested. I know how to put real people on the page because I know how to put real people in front of the camera. As opposed to just a lot of talk, you know, just as opposed to words and a mouth moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I'm lucky.
Your characters are very real to the readers. I can attest to that. How has your directing experience enhanced your choreography of a scene? Especially, I was impressed by the compelling way that you write your fist fight scenes and your weapon fight scenes.
Oh, well, I've seen some violence in my life, so I know what it really looks like, first of all.
It's not your directing, it's real life. Wow, I never even thought of that.
Well, I mean, you know what, real life helped me out. I think the difference between real life and art is how my directing experience helps me out. Because, you know, nobody wants to really watch a fist fight. It's sad. It's sad when you look at a fist fight. It's ghastly when you look at a fist fight. You want to run in between two people and separate them. Like, you know, let's find a better way. It is not entertaining at all. It's just, you know, short of being in the square circle with gloves on and a referee. I can't watch a fist fight. I've been in a bunch of fist fights in my life, and I can't watch them. So, but at the same time, you know, it is the genre, and violence happens. And, you know, the difference between grossing the reader out, the difference between turning the reader off, you know, the difference between, you know, hitting the reader with something appalling and something psychologically jarring and hitting them with something that's exciting. That's where the directing comes in. Because, you know, in fistfights, in gun battles, rarely is there anything heroic about it. You know, and when guns start going off, or when, you know, teeth start chipping and knuckles start open, you know, it gets a little, it's not for the squeamish, basically. And yet, being a director helped me find the essential parts so that the violence, the action is true to the situation and true to the intent of the actual human beings that I'm writing about.
Wow.
So nobody's just a tough guy for the sake of being tough.
Yeah.
I think there's a line in the final 2 chapters of the book, you know, when things begin to wrap up and start getting really violent and start getting really edgy.
Yeah.
Where, you know, Elliot and his cohorts are outnumbered in a gunfight. And they're vastly outnumbered. And so, because they misjudged, you know, how many folks will be around when they need to pull off a certain something.
Yep.
And so Elliot says, just take out 1 to 2 of them because they're not all brave. You know, it's 30 of them. They can't all be brave. You know, you knock this one upside the head, you shoot this one in the face, you You take down maybe 2% of them, and you'll see how many run after that. And that's kind of where that's kind of where directing comes in, to balance the fantastical with the rational, and then to be able to deliver it in such a way that doesn't turn off the reader. I think that's kind of how I was able to use that to pull it off.
And also, what that shows is, again, a great example of your incredible insights into human nature that are throughout this book that are just so impressive. Can you tell us why you titled your book A Negro and an Ofe?
Oh, okay. Well, Ofe is kind of period slang for a particular type of white person in the eyes of a black person. You see it sometimes in older writings. I think James Baldwin has used it, Ralph Ellison has used it. It's fallen out of parlance, and while there are some theories, nobody really knows the origins of the word. But an Ofe isn't just a white person. It isn't just a pejorative term for any old white person. It's more that it's a very particular white person in a situation where it's a white person who can make life hard for a black person just because the black person is black and the white person is white. So take, for example, you got a few guys and their friends on the job, and then, you run into a guy who used to work with you at the bar, and it's like, hey, man, we haven't seen you at work. What happened? And he says, well, Ofe's nephew needed a job, so I had to lose mine. And that is the particular, that's
okay.
the thing. Yeah, and Ofe is the kind of guy who would pull you over because you're wearing a tuxedo, driving a really nice car on the way to your wedding. That's an Ofe. And Ofe is the type of person, who would make life hard for you simply because they have whiteness that you don't have. And so Elliot Caprice, on the other hand, his mom was white, his dad was black, and he doesn't know either of them. His dad died in the red summer of 1919, and his mom abandoned him with his uncle and his black uncle. So, he himself is a Negro and an Ofe. And America at the time itself was made up of two cultural hemispheres, which is black folks and white folks. And rather than integrate, there was a very, broad dividing line between those two communities, whereas white folks kind of bled into the black community for culture, but black folks couldn't bleed in the other direction into white society so easily. And so there's always this balance. There's always this dancing act. And so, but it ain't all white folks. I mean, a white person who's just as poor as a black person couldn't possibly be an Ofe. And a white person like JFK couldn't be an Ofe because he paid the appropriate lip service to his civil rights and things like that. But, a white person who's a really mean middle manager on the job that keeps you from getting your promotion and a raise in order for you to do better for you and yours, you might call him an Ofe.
Yeah.
So it's very specific.
Yeah.
It's economic, it's class driven, it's cultural, and where we may not match up community for community along our racial experiences, we have a whole lot more in common on a class level than we like to give ourselves credit for as Americans. And so, I just chose that word because it's provocative. It perks up your ears. You ask what it is. Man, what's an Ofe? I never heard that before.
I know. Kind of I had to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and it pulls you in, and yet
it does.
I think in the text you can see that the names we call each other, the words we use to marginalize one another, to demean one another, they're rooted in far more personal and fear-based notions that we have about ourselves rather than one another than we like to think about. And so I like making folks think. Like, crime fiction is something that you can use to reach people in a way whereas they would have to seek out literary fiction or nonfiction for a particular reason. And, the title attracts people, and yet they stick around for what's going on in the fat meat of the book beyond the title.
Oh, yeah.
And then I always hear back from these people who say, you know what, I almost didn't read it, but once I did, I really saw a side of something that I hadn't considered before. And, I get a lot of thanks for that. And I just, it was a risk. I'm glad I took it. I might not have taken it if I had to think about it. If it wasn't my debut novel and I wasn't being published by Down and Out Books and, like maybe a bigger press or a press that wanted to put it out and put something behind it, demanded that I change it. Well, and if I had to make the decision today, I don't know what I would choose. But back then, I just, I just flew by on the seat of my pants, and we're actually having this conversation. So I wouldn't do it twice, but I don't regret doing it either. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it does. The title, at least for me, I can speak my own. The title made me a little uncomfortable, and but uncomfortable is something that I kind of like in my reading. I like to be uncomfortable because then I feel like I'm being exposed to something new. I've got something different, and I like that. And your book certainly is thought-provoking. That I would definitely say your book is very thought-provoking, and I just getting past the title was no problem at all, and the thought-provoking stuff within the incredibly great story I enjoyed. The character name Elliot Caprice, where did you come up with that character name?
These things just kind of come to me. I honestly, I mean, I understand that Caprice fits his notion. Caprice fits his behavior. He's always stricken with capriciousness, right? Like he runs headlong into things and then figures it out. He figures it out once he gets there. He leaps and then looks, right?
Yes. I was wondering if that lent itself to the name.
Yeah, and it does. I hadn't considered it, though, until years after I came up with the character. I used to play around with it, like with screenplay exercises and just, writing little, flash fiction back before they called it flash fiction, little short stories to pass the time away. I came up with him and that. And, Elliot, like Elliot Ness. Elliot just seems like a lawman's name.
Awesome.
Elliot just seems like the name of somebody who would arrest you, man. So that's interesting.
Awesome. I didn't make that connection. I like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it just kind of stuck. If I had longer to think about it, I might give you a better, more philosophical answer. But I really just think it came to me, man, and I just ran with it. And then I was just as surprised as you when I started really breaking down the etymology of both of his names.
Yeah, that's great. Well, family and friendship are deep ties for Elliot, and in the book we see that in both types of relationships he gives everything. And at times he fights disappointment in what he gets in return. Some of his friends and family have become such favorites for me, George the sheriff and also Frank Fuqua, and more of them. How do relationships fare in noir stories where the actions lead to lose-lose situations?
Mm-hmm. Well, disappointment is pretty much the through line of hardboiled, the through line of noir. Yeah, and just your standard shamus, your gumshoe. He takes the case. He just wants the money. He has a heart, so he falls in too deep. He gets tangled into everything that is going on, and he gets way more invested than he should. And something goes wrong, and he doesn't get paid, and he doesn't get satisfaction, but yet doing the right thing just has to serve as the balm to whatever disappointment that he suffers. I've always been into that. I've always found that, relationships bring us the most disappointment simply because it may be true that we can't choose who we love, but we can choose how we love them. And we can choose what part that love for them will play in our daily lives. And when you're really vulnerable and when you're really in a relationship with others, you're actually opening yourself up to deep hurts simply because you want to be open for that person. And so, it just, part of it is just sticking with the trope of, the gumshoe who has a heart of gold, even though they try not to show it, and then they always get burned for it in the end, but they survive and make enough dough in the case to take another case to give you another story for the next book. And then, yeah, and then part of it is that I need to show through Elliot's journey that life is in fact a progression of moments, and that you have to be invested in your own life first in order for you to be able to dig through the silt in order to find the gold. And a lot of times in relationships, you have to spend of your own gold from within in order to produce any gold at all. But in the end, it's just about spending.
Yeah.
It's not about who dies with the most gold. It's about who sowed the most riches as a result of being who they are. And I think that was just the vibe I was on at the time. So all of these characters came to me, I had a rough childhood. I had a lot of surrogate parents. I had a lot of surrogate siblings. I found fathers and mothers and, brothers and sisters among all sorts of people coming up. And family was where you found it if you weren't born with it and you couldn't make it yourself. And I just think I was feeling that part of my life at the time I started constructing the narrative. So, somewhere in there, I think I'm trying to say something about sticking together and really just coming to value people for the sake of who they are and not what they can do for you. But I'd have to go back and read the whole book again in order for me to know what my real answer would be. So I think somewhere in what I just told you, there's like a decent answer. I'm sorry.
I think it's a beautiful philosophy. I love that. It's really great. And the other thing about your characters, I especially want to thank you for the wonderful Elaine and Mike characters. And
yeah.
I love them. And in particular, I love the dialogue between Elliot and Mike. Leading up to, well, I'm going to give you a couple of quotes, and your book is written in real people language, so I'm going to clean up a couple of little words, so it'll be a little different, not a direct quote, but from the book. So Mike says, ever had a woman have your number, Elliot? And Elliot says, maybe once, but that funny business back in Chicago made it all go to whatever. And then he says, well, you got off easy. You can have it all figured out for yourself. Maybe you're not the same race, or one of you is already married. You're poor, she's rich, you're a Jew, she's Catholic. None of that matters if she's got your number. There's nothing you can do about it but give in. If you're lucky, she won't eat you alive. I see it all the time. Elaine and Mike are so very passionate. Can you tell us about writing these two characters?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, love has its way with you if it's real. And, we have all of these divisions in this country, seeming divisions in this country around race and class and gender and religion and philosophy and politics, and yet love doesn't really care about any of that.
Yeah.
Love will spoil your highest idea of yourself. Love will interrupt your notions of who you think you are and what you should be doing with yourself. You could think and like Mike says, you could think you have it all figured out, and then somebody comes along who's got your number, and you have to start from zero with your understanding of yourself. And I thought that by giving Mike and Elaine a difficult relationship, her being African American and he being Jewish by way of Lithuanian Jewish heritage, I because of the challenges culturally and socially and politically in America, as well as their own ideas about themselves. Elliot is black and white, and then you've got this mixed race couple that seem to be a part of his reemergence into respectable society, and he's watching their dynamic and their difficulties and how they hang on to each other despite it all, and without being hokey, because they don't always get along, and they don't always see eye to eye, and they don't always have the same stake in what their activities are as far as being in practice and being on the fringes of the civil rights movement and all of that. I just kind of thought that would be enough contrast to where Elliot needed an actual home base. Yeah. But he needed a home base that kept him uncomfortable in order for him to be able to evolve himself into being someone who wants to be involved in people's lives rather than be hermetic and keep away from himself. And I just, those insights on love between the two of them, I think inform what I expect to be, pretty much the crux of the series, at least, the next two books that I got figured out. So, they were interesting in that I just wanted to show that love really doesn't care what your plans are. And love really, if it's true, love really exists to spoil your plans no matter what, and that the shape of that can actually enrich your life rather than harm it if you let it happen.
That's exciting about the next two. Now I'm really excited because I would love to be more with those two characters. I really enjoyed them particularly, and I wish that they lived next door and I was friends with them because they were great to read about. I also thought your femme fatale part was really well crafted. Could you just talk a little bit about your challenges in writing Margaret McAlpin's part?
Margaret is interesting in that she is afflicted by the indignation that I think most women have with society, which is being relegated to a particular station from no fault of your own. Meaning, her story is interesting. She becomes an heiress to a gigantic fortune without being stuck in a situation where she can do anything with it or make anything work for herself because of it. Because, her beginnings were she was cleaning houses for some rich folks in Kenilworth, Illinois. Yeah. And so in writing her and crafting her the way I did, I wanted it to be real, and I wanted to deliver her without judgment, although I did need a pretty good femme fatale. Yeah. Except that my actual femme fatale is structural racism. And Margaret serves as a counterpoint to structural racism in that she's just as oppressed and beleaguered, and she's a rich white woman. Yeah. So, I wanted to stand it on its ear. And I wanted to give her this attitude. I wanted to give her this Essex bred, really cool charm school, finishing school kind of mystique, but then, bring her back to reality, because you get the idea that this crafty woman always resented having her hands in a rich man's toilet. Wow. The first day she swabbed the ball, she knew she was going to own everything. That's who I wanted her to be. And to me, I think the righteous indignation of women is got to be the most powerful force that we have driving things in America today. And the more you try to put a cork on that bottle, you're just allowing the pressure to build. And it's just going to get stronger the more you shake it, the more you agitate it. And I just wanted to show through Margaret that, your personal sovereignty comes first before your morals, before your decency. And oppression shapes people and changes people and causes people to make choices that other people may not always agree with, and yet it's just going to happen anyway. And then, she just kind of exemplifies what Mike's talking about with when a woman has your number. When a woman has your number, she can get you to marry her, despite the fact that you all are different races and ages. When a woman has your number, she can get you to sign on the dotted line and make you a billionaire for no other reason than because you fell in love with it. It just, or she could do all sorts of stuff in between. So, we would have to be, I just find it ridiculous that, women get paid 78 cents for every dollar a man makes. I find it ridiculous that, women have to jump through hoops to prove to Americans that they are as qualified as a man. Because, it's just like trying to negotiate with a hungry tiger. It's like, my man, women are more powerful than we are. Women got to figure it out. Women have it figured out in ways that we don't. You can pretend like you're superior to a woman if you want to, but you playing with fire and you're probably going to get eaten alive. But that's fine. You go step in that cage with that tiger. You go ahead. Go ahead and try to convince that tiger they're inferior to you. Go ahead. I'll be on the outside of the cage watching you get yourself beat up. So, yeah, that's kind of what I think I was doing with Margaret. And then, beautiful femme fatale who has all of the secrets and dispenses them out one at a time. That's classic. But I just decided to play it a little different because I'm doing everything to the left of what we're expecting, I think, in the genre. So
I think you are too.
She was a big help.
I think you are too. And there's so much depth to your characters. And I think the opportunity that it gives to the readers is that the readers get to actually experience someone else's skin. And I love that. It's so good. Instead of continuing to talk about a Negro and an Ofe, how about if, Danny, would you treat us to a reading from a Negro and an Ofe?
Sure. Well, let me ask you, how much time do we want to devote to it? I mean, I could pick some pages from chapter 1 that you might like, and I think that'll work.
Yeah. How about, can you give us like 2 or 3 minutes from the beginning?
Sure, I can.
That would be great. Sure. That would be a treat.
And I'll try to jump around to keep it in the exciting parts.
Okay.
And I'll try to avoid the non-radio word parts.
Well, give us the first couple of sentences though, because I'm telling you that really drew me right into your story. I loved your opening.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay, this is from chapter 1. As he came to with blurred vision, he detected light. It didn't shine so much as claw at the brick walls like the slender fingers of angry ghosts. An endless flight of concrete stairs coiled away from him. He was headed downward, though not by his own volition. He remembered drinking in a roadhouse joint. Black Knight was playing on the juke. He understood how Charles Brown hated to be alone. A shot of corn, a friendly chippy, more corn, an offered dance. By the time Brown's brother was in Korea, he heard hard words behind him. Get your hands off my woman. The absolute wrong thing to say to him when he had been drinking. F you, this and that. A shove. The juke stopped. A fist for that fat, greasy, chicken-eating mouth. He heard something behind him. Then black. His head hurt. He heard ringing and assumed blood in his ears. A moment later, it sounded like jangling. He figured it was chains or keys. His hands were bound. His wrists were cold. He thought he was cuffed. He hoped he was cuffed. He accommodated himself to incessant disorientation while in Europe, where he would climb out of his tank and find himself immersed in bullets and bombs and shouts and screams. In the din of war, he learned to disregard the senses that failed him and focus on his singular survival. That's how Elliot Caprice returned from the Battle of the Bulge with all his limbs and most of his wits. He shifted his feet. Take it easy, boy. Boy. I'm in the Bing. Shut your hole, the fat jailer holding his feet said. He hadn't seen the skinny jailer holding him by his arms until he rolled over after they dropped him on his face. If you can talk, you can walk, Skinny said. Easy to see which one of y'all picks up the donuts in the morning, said Elliot. You're in the custody of the St. Louis County Sheriff. You'll be detained until you appear before a judge. You got it, smart guy? Fatty said. just before he kicked Elliot in the ribs. He rose to his feet. Skinny pushed him down the stairs. And why am I here when I vaguely remember being dry gulched in Belleville? Well, you had a police issue 32 on your person, Skinny said. He produced a key ring. So get comfortable, make friends. He shuddered as the cell door slammed behind him. It sounded eerily similar to the lid of his M18 Hellcat. The blast of body heat combined with the cold limestone felt just like old Lucille's air-cooled engine exhaust. He was rudely reminded of the involuntary smells men create when their glands respond to despair. Sweat and filth rushed through the air on panicked breaths. Elliot immediately turned back toward his jailers. Look here, Constable, how's about my phone call? No calls on Sunday. Gotta wait until the morning. Could be in front of the judge by then, said Skinny. That'd be too bad for you, Haffy. Beatty's a hanging judge, said Fetty. Man, I'm colored. They're all hanging judges. I think that's pretty good.
That is awesome.
It's great.
This book is so good. Julie, I know you've got a bunch of questions. Go ahead.
I do. And in the interest of time, I'm going to try to get through them here quickly anyway. I'm hoping you can clear up something for me that I'm a little confused about. What's the difference, in your view, between noir and pulp? Are these expressions interchangeable?
Pulp is just the paper they used to print cheap books on back in the day. That's all it is.
Okay.
They would print noir on pulp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when folks, there's a little Quentin Tarantino in there with folks getting it mixed up. And there's just a whole lot of, cultural shifting there. The bottom line is that the reason why folks conflate pulp with noir is that, back in the 50s when, books and radio were pretty much your only form of entertainment. That's the cheapest paper that they could find was wood pulp, mainly consisting of all sorts of books that didn't sell. They got ground up and used as paper pulp. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So if you get a big print run and your publisher can't sell any of them, not only does your advance get snatched back, but they also send your books to the pulp house, and they pretty much just put all your books in a water container with a big shredder at the bottom, and they pulp your books.
Oh, that's so sad.
Okay.
It's just it's terrible for us, right?
Yeah.
Thank God for print on demand for some of us. So I mean, just
okay.
Yeah. But basically, that's all it is.
Okay. Good. That helps.
Pulp is the paper that well, first of all, noir comes from film noir, which is a French term for dark movies.
Yes.
That, didn't have heroic characters, didn't have, a moral center. Everybody's, everybody gets their comeuppance at the end. And so, we're looking in hindsight from a movies and television culture onto our nostalgia for old books back in the day. That's pretty much where the confusion comes in. But there are noir books, and there's a particular type of noir story that was popular in cheap paperback books that you fit in your back pocket and you read on your lunch break, at the warehouse or in the factory. And these books were printed on pulp.
Okay.
The pulp is the cheapest, driest, beigest paper that they can find, and that's where everybody gets I don't know if it's confusion. I just it's sort of like how street food becomes delicacies over time. Pulp. We think about pulp as this indicator of quality in our fiction, when in reality it was an indicator that you could buy that book for a dime.
Okay.
That's about all it is.
All right. Well, I'm going to skip ahead to another question. I wanted to touch on a sensitive subject, something called appropriation, or maybe we should call it misappropriation. Some writers view it as flattery, and others see it as the taking of something cultural, something that doesn't belong to you. And I know, Danny, you've said in one of your blogs that people just need to quit that stuff. And yes, I cleaned that up a little bit, but I've got to say, I've got to say, years ago, there was an excellent best-selling book that came out by a writer named Arthur Golden called Memoir of a Geisha. And clearly, Arthur was not female, not Japanese, and has never, to my knowledge, been an early 20th century geisha. And yet, as a writer, he brilliantly channeled a brutal and beautiful story of a woman whose life was far removed from what any of us could ever imagine. And I thought of a couple other recent examples, more recent examples. One would be Catherine Stockett's book, The Help. And perhaps even in music, one might say that Justin Bieber's recent song, Despacito, could be another example of appropriation. So I'm wondering what your feelings are as a writer on this topic in regard to writing about African American protagonists.
I'll simply say this: when it relates to African Americans, which is really all I'm comfortable with speaking to. I mean, you kind of know when the author has love and respect and a certain level of endearment for a culture that they are leveraging in order to tell a story. And you can tell when they don't. It's really easy to see. I mean, it's just, the bottom line for me is, how many black folks do you know? How much interpersonal association do you have with black folks? What do you understand about our cultures? Are you a writer who isn't black, who's writing black characters in black situations because you have an affinity for it, because you have proximity to it, because you have a love for it, because you have an intention of exposing others to it? Or are you doing it because it'll make you edgy and it'll make people talk about your book and it'll make people want to read it and it'll make folks want to give you a book deal and it'll make editors want to consider you? And we all know when somebody's faking it, and we all know when somebody's being real about it. And so, you can tell when it's coming from a place of love and fascination, and you can tell when it's coming from a place of exploitation. And I would never tell anybody not to write something that they wanted to write. I would never tell someone not to pursue, a story, a book project, whatever it may be, a piece of art on any level, in any medium, in any genre. What I will say is, if you think you're being clever and you think you're being cute, more than likely you're misappropriating another person's culture. And you just have to decide throughout the exercise whether or not you're approaching it from a place of love, even if what you're writing about isn't very loving stuff. If you're approaching it from love or if you're approaching it from opportunism. Because when it's opportunism, it reeks on the page and folks will be able to see it even if you don't. And it's a little rough to wait for the reviews to come out before somebody clues you into the fact that you actually made a big mistake.
Okay.
And
I think that's really, really helpful and really clear perspective on that.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't tell anyone not to write whatever it was that they intended to write. But I will say, if you get it wrong, we live in a different world. We live in different times, back in the day, we had Memoirs of a Geisha, but we didn't have Twitter. So, And we didn't have publishing houses and editors insisting that authors leverage Twitter in order to sell books. So you just got to think about what you get yourself into, the full breadth. Because a lot of folks think the work is done once they finish writing the book, but that's actually where the work starts. And that work involves a whole lot more people other than the author.
Yeah.
And even those of us among the author set even those writers among us who would rather not, still have to go out and do the interpersonal outreach, social media, book readings, signings, speaking engagements that really, get these numbers running in order for us to keep, being granted opportunities to write books for money.
Sure.
And, it's, when you want to know as soon as possible that you've crossed the line between, let's just say, adoration and misappropriation. Because you don't want to find out after the book's already printed up and sitting on a bookshelf somewhere.
For sure.
That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
So
I can only imagine. Yeah.
So if you don't have any black friends, you better make some. You better
Fair enough.
You better hire somebody that you can actually talk to about what you're writing. You better
Absolutely.
You better invite other people to get involved with your process.
Yeah.
Because if you find out that what you thought was being clever and cute about getting folks to read your story is really what a horde of young people on Twitter would call cultural appropriation, your life's going to get really painful all the time.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and all you wanted to do was write a book. So, I mean, hey, maybe I wouldn't say anything to you about it, but I mean, quite frankly, in the age of social media, I don't really have to say anything to you about it.
True. That's true.
I mean, if you asked me, I would tell you, hey, man, I don't think you're coming from the right place. Don't do it. But, I mean, like, I got my own books to write. So, approach with caution, I guess I should say.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. And getting back to something Wendy touched on also, dialogue is such an obvious strength of yours. I mean, hearing you read and reading it in print, there's almost a syncopation like jazz to a lot of your dialogue. Do you hear the speech patterns and cadence of your characters from all backgrounds in your head before you write them down?
Before, during, after. A lot of times my off the page writing usually happens in dialogue. I hear things in dialogue first.
Okay.
The sound that I hear in my heart before I sit down to write is dialogue. And yeah, the dialogue comes to me first. Just the words that folks say to each other, the speech and the semiotics and the nonverbal communication that characters exchange with one another in order to move things along in a particular plot situation, that comes to me first. And then I wonder, well, why would they say that to each other? Like, why would he? Okay, that's a great line. Now, what the hell did he say that to him for?
Yeah.
Sure.
And then I'll think of context. So I'll get a jewel of a piece of dialogue, and then I will find the context that makes it relevant. And then it's as if I turn the lights on and I can see everything that's happening in the room.
Wow.
So yeah, it usually comes to me in dialogue first.
Interesting. Okay.
I can prose. I got to take my time with sometimes, and subtext. I have to really make certain that I'm not misleading the reader. But dialogue, I can write that all day, every day. I could write that. I probably said 40 things in our conversation just now that I could crib for another book sometime or a story or something. So yeah,
Great.
Dialogue is just.
Great.
I get away with a lot with dialogue. I mean, I just think that's natural.
But it's what makes the book come alive.
Thank you.
And speaking of books, what's next for you in terms of books? And will we see and hear more from Elliot? It sounds like we will.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm actually halfway through finishing book 2. I'm going to put it away for a couple of months while I go do all the conferences and the book touring and all of that. And then, so you could look for Elliot sometime, I would think toward the end of 2018, early 2019, but I'll follow back up with you and let you know. And then,
good.
Good.
I've got short stories in a few anthologies coming out this year, one of which I'm getting the most national press for, which is exciting, which is the Crime and Politics, The Obama Inheritance, which is published by Three Rooms Press out of New York City. It is an anthology based on conspiracy theories related to Barack Obama's 2 terms in office. So 15 writers will pull together, Walter Mosley being among them, by Gary Phillips, who's also a contributor and who was this year's Toastmaster at the at BoucherCon next week, which is great for him, and like a legend in his own right. And you could write about anything you wanted as long as it covered a conspiracy theory or conspiracy theories related to the 2 terms of the first African American president in U.S. history. And so you can make it pulp fiction, you can make it bizarro, you can make it noir, you can make it science fiction noir. There's a lot of genre mashups, and My Story Brother's Keeper is somewhere in the center of the book, and it's headlined, I think I mentioned before, by none other than Walter Mosley. So it's got a lot of ears perked up. It's a really good read, and it really speaks to our current political times. And I try to deliver an 8,000 word takedown of presidential politics on the whole, because I think it's just too important to all of us in America who the president is. And I think that, it's more important to me who's running the local school board than who the president is half the time. Who's my mayor? Who's my congressperson? Who's my senator? What are they cooking up? What's going on with the city councilmen, and how are they using these funds on these charter schools? Like, these are things that I think we should get closer to.
Yeah.
But we lose sight of that because we've got this Super Bowl of politics called the presidential elections every year, and every 4 years. And I think that, actually every 2 years somebody's running for president. Actually, every day somebody's running for president. So
feels like it.
Yeah. So the Obama Inheritance, it's from Three Rooms Press. I think it's distributed by PGW, and you can find it everywhere. And it's a really good book. I am one of 15 contributors to that lovely piece. It has a great cover. It's striking. Some really big names, some really heavyweights. Gary Phillips, Walter Mosley on down, and then somehow little old me got up in there. So it's cool.
That's great.
Cool.
That sounds like a great book recommendation. I'm going to have to look for that anthology myself. It sounds good.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to jump right into my segment, which is the value of keeping on, keeping on. And I'm going to riff on another in a series of key character traits that writers need and also hope to reveal in our protagonists. And that would be persistence, and certainly along with that, resilience. And I know Danny spoke about resilience early on and grit, and this is definitely needed if you're in any creative endeavor. So we always hope to instill these traits in our children too, but that takes time, a lot of time. Persistence is the characteristic that all writers, I believe, need most. And there are different kinds of persistence. The energy it takes to complete an outline of your next book, the spiritual durability to keep writing through that awful first draft when you try to convince yourself that it can only get better from here on. And then there's the kind of extra strength resilience to try, fail, get rejected, pick yourself up, and query or submit your manuscript again and again, often without any validation that you're on the right track. It's that strength which creative people must find within themselves, whether writing, directing, painting, doing stand-up, or composing music. I'm going to share a couple of quotes by 2 very successful writers with you, words I know I need to hear on a regular basis, and I think others might need as well. Here goes. You don't start out writing good stuff. You start out writing crap and thinking it's good stuff, and then gradually you get better at it. That's why I say one of the most valuable traits is persistence. That's from Octavia Butler. And this one. The truth of the matter is that the people who succeed in the arts most often are the people who get up again after getting knocked down. Persistence is critical. That's from Scott Turow. And last, I'm recalling a brilliant ad campaign by a lady named Janet Champ when she was at Nike's ad agency, Weeden Kennedy, years ago. It still reads like poetry for all of us who've encountered adversity in its many forms. I'm going to quote from the last part of it. They will tell you no 1,000 times no until all the no's become meaningless. All your life, they will tell you no quite firmly and very quickly. They will tell you no, and you will tell them yes. So here's to persistence, and here's to more yeses.
Beautiful. Well, today I'm going to talk about how we crave heroes. To quote the American President movie from the character Lewis, people want leadership, and in the absence of genuine leadership, they'll listen to anyone who steps up to the microphone. They're so thirsty for it, they'll crawl through the desert toward a mirage, and when they discover there's no water, they'll drink the sand. Leadership comes from personal bravery. We all need to find ways to cultivate our personal bravery, and that's not something you can draw out for a special occasion and wave it around for effect. That's something we all have to cultivate daily. In Danny's book, I became obsessed with what he portrays so vividly, the inevitability that the fight goes on. In his book, Elliot will earn resolution on one thing, and it's so hard fought, and then I realize, but there's more ahead. There's a bigger picture ahead, and I gear up again for more personal bravery. That's part of noir, and that's also part of life. There's no once and done. There are everyday heroes all around us, like Lieutenant William Drury, who ended up losing his life for what's right. And as Danny says in his acknowledgments, the tragedy of his death in 1950 affected not only his wife and children, but the entire city of Chicago, and helped shape the fight against organized crime. I urge you to celebrate and support the everyday heroes around you, and grow your personal bravery. Both of these are things I need to do more of. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. That takes personal bravery. And I do have a book series that I'd like to recommend. It's the Maggie Hope Mystery Series by Susan Elia McNeil. And you can dive into this series of books at any point and enjoy it. But don't cheat yourself out of any of these engaging, can't-put-it-down World War II mystery spy thrillers. Start with Mr. Churchill's Secretary. This author writes very realistic novels about the English battle during World War II. The heroine is Maggie Hope, a young American woman in London in 1940. She begins working at Bletchley Park, Winston Churchill's secret intelligence and computers headquarters. There we're introduced to secrets, daring, and a diverse group of interesting characters. Maggie excels in math and logic, but it's her code-breaking skills that prove especially useful in the war effort. Her pursuits draw the reader into spy rings, assassination plots, and the London bombings and rationing of World War II. It's thrilling reading, but why do I think the author's research and writing skills paint such a realistic picture? My 94-year-old mother was about Maggie Hope's age when she lived in England during the war. My mother was a volunteer ambulance driver and also a Churchill volunteer plane spotter. During the Blitz, she got so skilled she could distinguish types of planes just by the motor sound and tone. She was one of many everyday courageous heroes. My mother loves this series of books and praised how it vividly brings back so many memories of what life was like then. The history is ingeniously woven into these mystery stories. In Mr. Churchill's Secretary, while working passionately for the Prime Minister and England, Maggie is also wrestling with family issues, searching for her lost father, and the mystery surrounding her mother. There's also romance amidst the war and the rubble. And reading about Maggie's close group of friends and housemates, you'll find that each of them has interesting lives and side stories as well. Maggie Hope is a logical, practical, courageous, smart, resourceful, passionate young woman. You will participate in the search for clues and attempt to break secret codes, and you'll work alongside her to solve these mysteries. Julie, what do you recommend today?
I've got a book that's contemporary suspense, and it's called Beautiful Lies by Lisa Unger. You could say that the basis for this book is that expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. How would you feel if you suddenly found out that everything you knew about your childhood and your family was, in fact, a beautiful lie? This is the path that our female protagonist, Ridley Jones, finds herself on. And it all starts when she leaps in front of a van to save a little boy, which is captured by a newspaper photographer. And the photo runs in papers and media all over New York City. Suddenly, mysterious packages arrive on her doorstep, and everyone she knows starts to feel like a stranger. Someone is watching her, following her, and dropping hints that she may not be who she thinks she is. What follows is a tangle of denial, deception, and betrayal, somehow linked to the brutal murder of a young mother and the unsolved disappearance of her toddler daughter long ago. There's involvement by the mob, which intersects with an organization run by the rich and powerful, and a fast-moving plot which attempts to answer some big questions such as, who am I really, and what are the unintended consequences of doing good? And consequences are really what most of her characters are wrestling with. Lisa Unger writes in this book, there are no villains here, not really. If you think about it, there are no true villains in life. Only in fiction do we see distilled versions of good and bad. In life, there are only good and bad choices. And sometimes, even choices can only be judged by their consequences. Lee Child called this mystery the best nail-biter I've read for ages. I know, I couldn't put it down. Well, we'd like to thank our wonderful podcast guest, Danny Gardner, for his insights on noir fiction, politics, and especially that dramatic reading of his work. We're both looking forward to reading more by him soon. It sounds like we'll have to wait until 2018. And please check his website at www.dannygardner.me for more information, especially on the Noir at the Bar reading events, which I know he appears at from time to time. And it's now time for our theme music to take us out. So until next time, keep reading and keep writing.